will be reading you Alex Rider, Book 9, Scorpia Rising. There's actually we're on part 2. Alex is the name of the part. Chapter 12, In the Picture. Eric Gunter was away for the whole of Monday at some sort of conference in Alexandria, handing over security to his assistant, an Egyptian called Naquib, who spent the entire day either smoking or dozing in the sun. It was infuriating to know that Gunter's office was empty, but Alex couldn't break in without him. He realized he had to wait for his return, and it wasn't until the end of Tuesday that he finally got his chance. Alex had been unable to concentrate, knowing that he was about to make his move. He had noticed Gunter at lunchtime, sitting with some of the teachers and drinking a glass of milk. He had never actually seen the head of security eat anything solid. Somehow, Alex managed to get through French, history, maths, and all the rest of it. He'd gone swimming and rehearsed the school play. And finally, he was on his own, hanging back after the last lesson had ended. He was fairly sure he's the only student left in the school. It wasn't just after 3:30. The gate would be locked at 4 o'clock, allowing him just a window of just 30 minutes. It might not be enough, but by now Alex knew the movements of Gunter, Naquib, and everyone else whose job it was to patrol the school and keep it safe. Gunter returned to his office at 3:15 every day. He worked there for about 20 minutes, then went over to the main gate to watch the students leave. It was surprising that this was part of his army training that he seemed to have forgotten. He repeated himself, and repetition is a gift to the enemy. It makes you predictable. It makes you an easy target. Alex waited in the corridor close to the office until there was a click and the door opened. He moved forward, timing it so that he arrived outside just as Gunter emerged. He glanced briefly inside before Gunter closed the door. The lock engaged automatically. Brenner! The security man was surprised to see him. What are you doing here? I came to see you, Alex said. Why? Alex put his hand in his pocket. I found this. He took out an iPhone and handed it to Gunter. What about it? Well, someone left it in class. I tried to start it up, but it's locked. I thought you could find out who it belongs to and hand it back. Gunter scowled. With his shaven head and hostile eyes, he had a sort of face that showed anger very easily. Lost property is no business of mine. You've got to hand it in at the gate. They'll put up a notice, and whoever's left this can claim it when they get it tomorrow. He gave it back and began to move away with a strange fumbling progress that suggested his muscles and skeleton weren't quite working together. He had only taken 2 steps when he turned round. How are you getting on here? He asked. I'm fine, Alex said. But you must be missing your friends in London. Yeah, yes, but I've got a lot of friends here too. Good, I'm glad to hear it. Gunter clomped his way down the corridor, leaving Alex wondering how he could possibly have known that he came from London. Of course, Gunter had looked at his file, but that was in the main office, and why would he have bothered to search it out? It was an interesting slip. Alex made a mental note of it. The corridor was now empty. It was 3:36. Alex was still holding the iPhone, cradling it in the palm of his hand. Careful not to place his own fingers on the screen. He hadn't actually found it. In fact, it had arrived at the weekend, sent by Smith and delivered in a padded envelope with a single sheet of instructions. Alex tilted the phone, checking the screen. Yes, Gunter had left a perfect thumbprint. He searched for the little button on the side, pressed it. There was a slight buzzing sound, and the image was reversed and then reproduced. It took about 20 seconds, and then a thin sheet of pink latex slid out of the slot when the power cable would normally be attached. Alex pressed his own thumb onto it. He then wrapped the sides round. If the machine had worked, he would now be wearing Gunter's thumbprint. But then, when had Smithers ever let him down? He touched his thumb with the latex cover to the screen. The machine read the thumbprint, at the same time registered the blood temperature behind it, and the door clicked open immediately. Somewhere nearby, someone called out. Eyes didn't move. It was one of the guards. If he came along the corridor now and saw the door open, that would be the end of it. But he heard footsteps going up the stairs to the first floor. He looked left and right, but there was no cameras, but one of the guards could appear at any moment. Guy would be back in less than 20 minutes. He had to move fast. He went in and closed the door behind him. The office was exactly as he had imagined it. Clean, very tidy, half empty. There was a desk and a couple of chairs. A steel filing cabinet, bookshelves, and very little else. A large window, barred on outside, looked towards the main gate. This was surely when the boy had been standing, spying when Alex as he left. Fortunately, Gunter had lowered the blinds before he left, so Alex could move freely without fear of being seen. He began with a desktop. There was a diary with a few notes scribbled in English, but they all seemed relaxed to meetings with the school, and there was no address or telephone number or any interest. Gunter had received about a dozen letters, and he flicked through them. There were several job applications. A salesman from an alarm company was trying to make an appointment. The wife of the Italian ambassador had written to complain about locals at the school gate, wolf whistling Gabriella. There was nothing to suggest any conspiracy, but then of course Gunter was a careful man. Even though his office was locked, he wouldn't have left any evidence in view. Alex examined the bookshelves. Gunter seemed to like murder mysteries and thrillers. There were books by Agatha Christie and Andy McNabb. A Guide to Egypt stood next to a thick volume called Teach Yourself Arabic. None of them seemed to have been opened. Otherwise the shelves were empty, nor were there any pictures on the wall. The room gave the impression of someone who just arrived or he was about to leave. Maybe Gunter didn't expect to be at Cairo College very long. Next, Alex turned to the filing cabinet. It was locked, and he was annoyed that he hadn't asked Smith for something to help him break in. He remembered the zit cream he had given on his first assignment. A few drops of that would have quickly burnt through the metal, but he could always come back to the office another time, provided he hung on to the latex thumb. He returned to the desk and tried the drawers. The first contained pens, envelopes and torch, and a pile of report sheets, which Gunter was expected to fill in every day. The second drawer looked like a medicine chest. It was crammed with different pills and a bottle of some sort of white liquid, with smells of peppermint. It reminded Alex that Gunter was a sick man, a wounded soldier. For a brief moment, he was tempted to leave. He had no right being here. Traveling through someone's private life, and it was too late to worry now. He had a job to do. He might as well get over with it. Someone knocked on the door, and his phone on the other side called out in Arabic. It might have been the guard he had heard earlier. Was he looking for Gunter, or had he somehow worked out there was an intruder inside? There was nothing Alex could do. The door opened and there was no way to hide. 10 seconds passed. Alex listened to the sound of his own heart. Nobody came in. Whoever had been there must be gone. Moving quickly now, afraid that he might be discovered at any minute, Alex tried the third drawer. It was an empty part from a couple of brochures. Advertising college. He swung it shut again, then opened it a second time. Was his imagination, or had something metallic moved somewhere inside the drawer? He had heard it as distinct sound following a clunk as it hit the wooden edge. He took the brochures out. There was nothing beneath it, unless he placed his hand flat on the bottom of the drawer and pushed. He tilted, and he saw that he had discovered a false bottom. There was a secret compartment underneath. He wouldn't have ever noticed it, but for an accident. A buyer had somewhere dropped into the hidden space and had rolled from one end to the other with a movement of the drawer. What else was in there? Alex put his hand in and pulled out a gun, made in Russia, with a star engraved in the handle. Was that something Gunter kept for his job at school? If it's so, why was it concealed here? It had been resting on top of the map, the edge of Sahara, and oasis town called Siwa. It seemed like an unlikely holiday destination, although Cairo College did sometimes organise trips into the desert. Next out was a newspaper or a copy of the Washington Post, about a week old. The front page was given over to a big article about the president's plummeting approval ratings, and underneath it a smaller one about pollution in the Gulf and Mexico. There might have been something relevant inside, but Alex didn't have time to read it. And Alex could buy the same edition and do that themselves. Alex memorized the date and set the paper aside. There was nothing else in the drawer except for a bundle of photographs. Alex spread them out over the surface of the desk and examined them. Most showed a large domed building which reminded him of the Royal Albert Hall in London, but which, from the palm trees that surrounded it, was more likely to be somewhere in Cairo. The pictures had been taken from every angle. There were cars parked outside and people, many of them young, carrying books, crossing lawns that surrounded it. A school or a university. This was a modern, liberated place. Some of the women were in jeans, hardly any wearing headscarves or veils. There was a picture of a room, perhaps inside a domed building. It wasn't so much as a room, it was a wide storage cupboard. Also, Alex saw red tiles, old painted cans, and a mop in their bucket, leaning against the wall. What on earth could Gunter want with a photograph of this? The next picture was even stranger. It was a close-up shot of a coat hook. Perhaps presumably in the same room. The hook was in the middle of the brick wall, shaped like a swan's neck. The edge of the metal had caught the flash, which was blowing up much out of the image. It certainly wasn't going to win any prizes in views of Cairo competition. There was one picture Alexander Owen found. He was looking at a photograph of himself at the school gate, showed him in full uniform, glancing back as left. At the end of the day, the photograph must have been taken in Gunter's office. Alex was in far distant, barely more than a centimetre high. It was certainly him. The definition was good enough for him to see his own face. Even so, there was something about it that puzzled him. He examined it carefully. There was something wrong. And he dug out his own iPhone, a real one with an 8-megapixel camera, and took snaps of all the photographs he had looked at. Then he carefully returned them with the map and the newspaper to the secret drawer, making sure they were in the same order he found them, and laid the gun on top. He wondered if MI6 would be able to make anything out of them. But it was up to them now. He finally achieved something. Maybe he even bought a ticket back home. Finally reached his pocket and took out a dead quote with his legs bent in the air. It was, of course, a bug, one of Smithers' jokes. He placed it on the carpet right in the corner. With a bit of luck, the cleaners wouldn't hoover it up, and from now on, Smithers would be able to listen in on anything that was said in the room. Alex made sure he had nothing behind, then tiptoed over to the door and listened. There was nobody outside. He quickly stepped in the crocodile and quickly walked away. It was almost 4 o'clock. He was very late leaving. Before he asked him what he was doing, he was forgotten his homework and had gone back for it. He passed the school secretary office and went through the main doors back into the ceiling key to the yard. The gate was ahead of him. A couple of guards were standing there smoking cigarettes, thinking their work was done. Then he saw Gunter on the far side of his yard. He was talking on his mobile, with his back slightly towards the school, as if afraid of being seen. It was too good an opportunity to miss. As he was already wearing his sunglasses, he stepped back in the shadows and took out his water bottle. He had heard Gunter's voice so clearly he could have been standing next to him. The House of Gold, yes, of course I know it. There was a pause. 5 o'clock tomorrow, I'll come alone. Do you think I'm an idiot? And if I'm satisfied, I'll authorize the final payment. Gunter rang off and walked away, disappearing around the side of the building. Alex waited a minute, then darted towards the main gate. Certain things seemed to be happening very quickly. The head of security had to be on his way to some sort of secret meeting. The payment was involved. He had to be part of a conspiracy that MI6 was looking for. Alex passed through the gate, and suddenly he was realizing he was standing in exactly the same spot where his picture had been taken. And instead he knew what was wrong. In the photo he had seen him standing on his own, and he was now. But he had never once left the school on his own. He was sure of it. Simon or Craig walked home with him every day, and if it wasn't them, it was Andrew or one of the other Scottish boys. There was always kids around Alex left at the same time as everyone else. So where had they gone? Had they all been airbrushed out, or was he simply wrong? There had been a moment when his image could have been captured with nobody else around. It didn't matter. The House of Gold at 5 o'clock the next day. Wherever it was, Alex planned to be there. In his hurry to get back to the flat, he didn't look round to see Gunter emerge from the side of the school and watched him, his lips stretched in this thin smile. Nor did he hear him make a second call. He listened in on the conversation. He's taken the bait, clearly not quite as clever as he's cracked up to be. He'll be there tomorrow. I know what to do. Right, Chapter 13. Chapter 13, The House of Gold. Alex found it easily enough on the internet. The House of Gold turned out to be some sort of shopping centre, specialising in jewellery. Fine gems and all your gold and silver dreams. That was how it advertised itself on the website. Come and seek us for the best pieces in Cairo. That name should have been given away, but it still seemed an unlikely destination for a man like Eric Gunter. Perhaps he's just going to buy a ring for his girlfriend. Perhaps he's just going to buy a ring for his girlfriend or wife, if he has one, Jack suggested. He said he was going to authorise the final payment. Alex said, You don't do that with a wedding ring. It doesn't have to be a jeweler. He could be meeting anyone. It's strange. It's a strange place to want to meet. The two of them were sitting in the living room of their flat. At the edge of their flat. Jack had been waiting for Alex with 2 glasses of ice-cold lemonade and a plate of sandwiches. He was normally hungry when he got back from school. Outside, the pool was crowded. There was a rough version of a water polo going on, and Craig and Jody called out to Alex to join. Then Mercy passed, but he had gone straight to the computer. houseofgold.com. Then he had told Jack what happened when he had found inside Gunter's office. What he had found inside Gunter's office. It wasn't a lot to go on. He realised, not after almost 3 weeks in Egypt. He wasn't buying jewellery, Alex insisted. He sounded, I don't know, mysterious, as if he didn't want to be overheard. You're sure he wasn't leading you on? Maybe he wants you to follow him. Alex shook his head. He couldn't have known I was listening to him. I was miles away on the other side of the yard. What about the pictures you found in his desk? Jack had Alex's iPhone. She flicked through the images on the screen. I don't know. We'd better pass them on to Smithers. He can send them to MI6. Why would anyone take a photo of you? Why would anyone take a photo of a hook on a wall? And what's this building? Do you think it's somewhere in Cairo? Jack held up the phone. Nice shot of you, she said. Yes, but if Gunter took it, then it means he knows who I am. Not necessarily. Why else would he have it? You think he takes photos of all the new students? He fell silent. Jack had been out in the sun, and she was looking tanned. They both were. It reminded Alex how long they'd been away. What are you going to do about Gunter? I suppose I'd better follow him. Alex went on before she could have argued. Make sure he doesn't see me, Jack. But I know that the House of Gold has got something to do with whatever's going on. 5 o'clock. I can go there after school. You mean we can go there after school? That's why I'm here, Alex. I'm keeping an eye on you. Thanks, Jack. Alex gulped down his lemonade. It was deliciously cold. I'm really glad you came. Are you? I don't know what I'd do without you. You're always there for me, and you make the best sandwiches. Jack smiled. You better get on with your homework, she said. You don't want Miss Watson breathing down your neck. An hour and a half of French grammar. Alex wondered if there was any other secret agents in Cairo being sent upstairs to do their homework, but he didn't complain. And an hour later, immersed in the future perfect of Avour and Italy, he was almost grateful that he could put everything else out of his mind. The next day was a Wednesday. It was also the day when Alex realized that his time at Cairo College was drawing to a close. He was having lunch with Andrew and some of the Scottish boys. When one of the sixth formers came over to their table, it was unusual for the older students to meet with the year 10s, but he realized that this one was examining him. He looked up into a face that he vaguely recognized. Dark, spiky hair, blue eyes, pockmarked cheeks. "Alex," the boy said. "You don't remember me?" Alex did remember him. He pretended not to. "I'm Graham Barnes. I was at Brooklyn until last year when my dad got sent out there. You're Alex Ryder, aren't you?" It was the worst coincidence in the world. The first time at Brooklyn, the new pupils were system that they had here. Alex had looked after quite well by Graham. There was no point denying it. Who he was. "Yes," he said, "that's me." "Ryder?" He made a face. "I thought your name was Brenner. My mother remarried. It was the first thing he could say before she died." He added weakly, "Yeah, it's good to see you." Graham nodded at the other kids. "I'll see you around." The rest of them went on, noticing as before. Alex noticed Andrew glancing at him once or twice and that knew he had been caught out. Andrew might not know about the reason why why that Alex had lied. It was like the seed of a poisonous plant, and very quickly it would start to grow. The day seemed to last forever as far as Alex was concerned. But at least 3:30 came with it the end of school. The usual fleet of buses arrived calmly, maneuvering around each other in the space outside the main gate. Most of the school left on foot, and Alex was among them. He noticed that Andrew avoided him. Maybe he'd spoken to Greg and Swan, but because even they left him alone. He was glad to see Jack, who was waiting in the side of a black and white cab. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Alex nodded. He was more sure of it than ever. "Let's go," he said. The two of them got in, and Jack leaned forward and gave the driver his instructions. She printed out the home page for the House of Gold, and the address was there in Arabic as well as English. She just made sure that the meter was actually running. It was a common trick for Cairo drivers to leave it off and then charge double when they arrived. The traffic in Cairo was as bad as ever. The air full of exhaust fumes and bad-tempered hooting. By the time the driver stopped them outside a smart hotel next to the river, Alex and Jack were grateful to get out. And Jack brought Alex a change of clothes, and he had wriggled into them on the back seat. Now he was wearing a kayaki t-shirt, knee-length shorts and sandals. Jack took care of his uniform, dressed in 2 shades of blue. He would have stood out at 20 paces. It was only now that he saw the House of Gold wasn't a house at all. It was an old paddle steamer, something out of an age, permanently moored on the sluggish brown water of the Nile. The boat was 3 levels high, painted white, with 2 huge paddles at the back. With 2 huge paddles at the back. 2 huge paddles at the back. With 2 huge paddles at the back. 2 huge paddles at the back. And a single funnel close to the bow. At some point it had been covered in a gaggle of jewellery shops, each one built into the old cabins and staterooms. A gangplank lit up from the quay The red's name was written in gold over the entrance of the main deck. What now? Jack asked. We wait. They found a little park with trees shading them from the sun and sat down on a wooden bench tucked out of sight. From here they could see everyone entering or leaving the boat. Alex looked at his watch. It was 5 to 5. I should come with you, Jack said. No, it's better if you stay here. If anything happens, you can call for help. If anything happens. Just 3 small words, but Alex knew how easily they could tear his life apart. And then he saw a taxi draw up and Eric Gunter got out. He had the same black suit that he wore at school and a small backpack on his shoulder. He paid the driver, then made his way up to the gangplank and onto the boat. Alex didn't hesitate. He was on his feet following, leaving Jack behind. With all his attention focused on the head of security, he didn't notice the grey Chevrolet parked in the street on the other side of the park. Nor did he see 2 men sitting inside the paddle watching the paddle steamer just like with him. But they saw him. Hey, that kid! Quickly, get his picture! The man spoke with an American accent. Why, what do you? Just do it! The second man raised a Nikon D3 digital SLR camera and pressed the button, capturing Alex as he reached the gangplank and stepped onto it. As he began to climb, what are you interested in a kid for? He moaned disorderly. I know who that kid is, the man replied. You better get ready. Looks like we've got trouble. Eric Gunter made his way through the House of Gold, squeezing between the tourists and local visitors who crowded out the narrow passageways. There were shops and stores on both sides with jewellery standing outside, some of them wearing the dark red Egyptian fez, like magicians about to do card tricks. There was jewellery everywhere, the same necklace and brooches that hung in every souk in Cairo. Little pyramids on chains, Egyptian hieroglyphics, lucky cats, scarabs, portraits of Queen Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun. Thousands and thousands of different pieces of sail. Sorry. All of them over-pieced, half of them fake. Gunter stopped next to one of the stores. Immediately the owner appeared. The owner, a fat little man was behind him. What do you want? I'll show you the best. I make you the best price. Gunter ignored him. There was a mirror on the counter, and he reached and tilted it, as if examining himself. But in fact, he was looking back the way he'd come, over his shoulder, and there he was, sulking in the doorway of an antique shop about 15 meters behind him. Nice rider. Gunter almost smiled to himself. It was just as he had said. 15-year-old whiz kid from British intelligence wasn't quite so smart after all. The trap was set. Everything was in its right place. Now all he had to do was finish it. He continued forward until he arrived at a doorway with a closed sign. This place on the paddle steamer that wasn't ready for business. He rang a bell and waited. There was a buzz and the door clicked open. The moment they went in, the shop sold antique weapons. There were hundreds of them spread out on the shelves, and in glass cases and hanging from the walls on hooks. Gunter ran his eye over swords and sabres, flintlock pistols, old army rifles and muskets, and daggers with huge jewellery set in the hilts. It was an interesting collision, he thought. Beauty and death, all these weapons had been used by armies or nomadic tribes. The blades had several flesh and bone. The guns had cut down men, women and children, sending them crashing into the sound. And now they were being sold as ornaments to hang in people's houses. Gunter wouldn't have been able to live with them. He knew too well the truth about the pain that these things brought. An old man, an Egyptian, had appeared behind the counter, round glasses, a thin face, and an old-fashioned wing collar and tie. He was shaved, and grey hair spread over his chin and cheeks as if they were diseased. He had narrow lips and bad teeth. His fingers were long and very precise, like those of a pianist. This was a man who had spent his whole life working with his hands. Mr. Habib? Gunter asked. This is my name. He spoke perfect English. I'm Eric Gunter. I think you were expecting me." The old man didn't move. Gunter reached into his pocket and placed a small metal object on the counter. It was a silver scorpion. The old man nodded slowly. "I was indeed expecting you," he said. "Do you have it?" "Of course." Habib reached down below the counter and produced another gun. There was nothing antique about this one. It was an L96A1 Arctic Warfare sniper rifle, gleaming and deadly. Perfect machine, a balanced piece of equipment. He laid it out for Gunter to examine. "I have made all the adjustments as requested," he said, "particularly to the trigger and the static iron sights." "What about the ammo?" "It will supply you with 58.59 bullets. The gun has 10 round box magazine. Can it be traced?" Habib looked pained. I do not ask you foolish questions, Mr. Gunter. I do not ask why you acquire a piece of killing machinery as finely crafted as this. Was it just you do the same?" "I apologize, Mr. Habib," Gunter said, and reached behind him, drew a pistol out from the waistband of the trouser, and shot the Egyptian once in the middle of his forehead. There had been almost no sound. The pistol was silenced. The Egyptian stared as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened, then slumped forward. Gunter snatched the rifle up. He didn't want it to be contaminated by the rapidly spreading pool of blood. Moving quickly, he went behind the counter and found what he was looking for, a golf bag, big enough to hold the rifle. He took a cloth out of his backpack and wiped the barrel clean. This wasn't only part of the gun he had touched, and he wasn't going to leave fingerprints. Using the cloth, he lowered the L96A1 into the bag and zipped it shut. Finally, he reached into the backpack and found a cumbersome package with several wires and a switch. He flickered the switch, closed the backpack, and snapped it behind the counter. He took one last look around, and then he left, satisfied with what he had done. In his haste, he didn't quite go close the door. I saw him go past. He noticed that Gunter had swapped the backpack for what looked like a golf bag. The moment the two of them were almost next to each other, I stood inside one of the stores, pretending to examine a mother-of-pearl jewelry box. He glanced back at Gunter as Gunter disappeared and stepped out into the corridor. The obvious thing would be to follow the head of security. That was what Gunter seemed to be inviting. But then he could notice the door with the shop wasn't quite closed. He took out his iPhone and texted Jack. "Gunter leaving. Follow him. We'll meet later." That was him taken care of. Now to see whom he had met, and perhaps he was given. Let's make his way down the corridor, pushing through the crowds. House of Gold had an air conditioning system, even so it felt hot and sticky. A couple of salesmen waved golden necklaces at him, but he ignored them. He reached the door and gently pushed open. It took him a few moments to get used to the gloom. His gaze swept over all the weapons. The place was like a medieval Alcen. Then he saw the man lying with the top part of his body on the counter and his arms spread out protectively around him. He could have been asleep. I realized instantly that he wasn't, and it wasn't a red cushion beneath his head. He could smell the blood in the sluggish air. He backed out fast. He knew that he had finally arrived at the heart of the conspiracy. Gunter had just killed this man, and it was easy enough to guess what he had been carrying in the golf bag. It still made no sense. Was he acting alone? Was he part of the larger organization? And what was the connection with Cairo College? Despite everything, this trail led him nowhere. He still had no idea what was going on. Alex was feeling sick. He just wanted to get back into the open air and wished now that he hadn't sent the instructions to Jack. Gunter was a killer. If Jack got too close, he would be in danger. He would call her again the moment he was out, but for now he was fighting his way back down the corridor. The gold and silver jewelry seemed to hammer at him from every direction. He's almost suffocating. And then there was an explosion. Ice was blown off his feet, and he felt the entire pedal stream as tight, chill violently to one side. All around him, people began to scream, thrown off balance. Gold chains, ornaments, and brass plates came raining down. At the same time, a plume of black smoke came surging through the corridor, instantly wiping out his vision. He could hardly breathe. All the electric lights had gone off. Someone fell on top of him. He pushed him off and crawled onto his hands and knees. The steamer rocked back in. It was like being on some hideous fairground ride. The crowds were still screaming, and then one of the gushing sounds, and I saw water, warm and evil-smelling, surged around his arms and knees. God, Eric Gunter, or someone who worked with him, had blown a hole in the side of the paddle steamer, and it was sinking. If he didn't get out, he would drown. He would go down with it. Everyone else had the same idea. The jewelers were stuffing necklaces and chains into their pockets, saving what they could. They had forgotten that once they were in the water, it would only drag them down. The floor moved again, slanting backwards, and again Alex found himself clawing his way uphill. There were people everywhere, all around him. He drew next to a sobbing Egyptian girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was on her own. He reached out and put an arm around her, pulling her with him. But he heard the sound of shattering glass. One of the counters had come loose and rolled down the deck into the wall. Gold coins and medals exploded out of it. Girl was snatched away. Her father or uncle had found her and took her without a word of thanks. Alex could see the exit in front of him. A rectangle of light that slanted heavily to one side. He came towards it, dragging himself up with his hands. A minute later, he was out on the open deck, sucking in the air, still tasting the smoke. The gangplank had fallen away. The paddle steamer was jammed into the side of the quay as if it had just crashed into it. Alex saw that thick mooring ropes were preventing it from sinking altogether, though they were already straining and they would surely snap at any moment. People were hurling themselves over the side. Some of them preferred the river to the hard fall and solid concrete below. Alex decided to join them. He was already soaking wet. There was no point risking a broken leg. He slid down the deck and dived into the murky water of the Nile. He vaguely wondered what germs he was exposing himself to. He broke the surface and swam towards the quay, making his way through the pieces of debris that floated all over the surface. At the same time, he noticed half-naked Egyptian boys diving off the edge into the water. They weren't trying to help anyone. They were scavengers looking for anything of value that might float. Jack, of course, was gone. How would he contact her now? His iPhone would be ruined. Alex reached the side of the quay and pulled himself out. He examined himself. At least he wasn't hurt, but he was filthy and battered by the force of blast. He could taste the Nile water on his lips and wondered how many millions of germs he had managed to swallow. The bomb hadn't killed him. The river quite possibly might. He crossed the quay, making for the park where he and Jack had waited. He guessed that as soon as he heard what had happened, she would make her way back into the same spot. He found the bench and sat down heavily. All around him, people were milling past, many of them dripping wet. There were white-suited police officers everywhere, already taking command, blowing whistles and shouting out orders. Of course, the police were all over Cairo. This was a country where always on a high alert terrorism. They would have spent months training for an event just like this. Alex shook his head. How could this have happened? How could this have happened? Alex shook his head. How could this have happened? And then there was a man standing in front of him. Alex looked up. "Come with me," the man said. "What?" "What?" The man opened his jacket, revealing a gun in a hoisted arm. "You heard what I said." The second man had crept up behind him and dragged him to his feet. Both of them were in their 30s, clean-shaven with sunglasses. The man with the gun had spoken with an American accent. "We have a car. We're going to walk you there. If you try anything, we'll shoot." I didn't doubt them. There was a seriousness about them. Since I knew exactly what they were doing. This was something they had done before. One man stood in front of him. The other was right behind him. Alex was pulled up in frock march out of the park and into the road. There was a grey Chevrolet parked right in front of him. For a brief moment, he considered a counter move. Right now, before it was too late, tapping with his elbow and swinging round to a kick out. But the first man had been expecting it. Suddenly, Alex's arm was seized and twisted around his back. "Don't even think about it," the man warned. Alex was bundled in, his face down on the back seat of the Chevrolet. The door slammed. Both men got into the front. The road was clogged up with traffic. But the car swerved around, performing a U-turn, and then they were clear, picking up speed, leaving the dead man and the wreckage of the House of Gold far behind. But everyone, that will be the end of me reading you this for now. So, goodbye, everyone, and thank you for listening to this quite exciting chapter. So, goodbye.